Today you will find out what is the most terrible conspiracy theory according to Reddit users.
The first story.
Years ago, my friend told me about a chilling episode of Outer Limits that's haunted me ever since. The premise was simple, but the execution, it was nothing short of a masterpiece. It was a story of an alien invasion, but not told from the usual heroic perspective. Instead, it unfolded through the eyes of two human prisoners held by the invaders for a brutal experiment meant to transform them into something else, something alien. The man was high-ranking in the resistance, a commander or strategist, someone who held vital knowledge about humanity's last hope. The woman was a civilian, or perhaps a scientist, ordinary in every sense of the word, but for her unyielding will. They communicated in hushed tones, whispering in the cold, sterile confines of their prison cells whenever they weren't being subjected to the grotesque procedures of alien transformation. Every day, their bodies were pushed to the brink, altered and mutilated, but, in their brief moments of clarity, they found solace in one another's words. The man, despite his pain, kept hope alive. He shared with her a secret that had been passed down from the highest levels of command, a fleet of ships hidden on the far side of the sun, humanity's last line of defense. These ships were capable of launching a surprise counterstrike, capable of turning the tide of the war. All they needed was time for the aliens to make their move, and then the fleet would emerge from the dark side of the sun, striking before the invaders could react. It was their ace in the hole, the ultimate trump card, but the clock was ticking, and the man wasn't sure if he would make it in time. Then one day, she returned from her experiment. She was different, her features alien, her skin tinged with an otherworldly hue, her eyes cold and unfeeling. The man, exhausted and broken by his own pain, feared the worst. But instead of going back to her cell, she stood before him, her alien form unsettling, but still unmistakably her. She looked at him with an unreadable expression, then spoke in a low, almost alien tone. "There's something you need to know." He froze, a sinking feeling gnawing at his insides. "What? What's happened to you?" Her voice softened, but the words that followed were like a dagger to the heart. "They're not changing me. They're changing me back." For a moment, the world stood still. The man couldn't process what she was saying. The horror of it began to dawn on him. The aliens weren't transforming humans into something else. They were undoing what had been done to them. They were returning to their true form. And if she, once a human, had already been altered, what did that mean for the rest of humanity? The cold truth hit him like a wave. He had been so focused on the grand strategy, so sure that humanity's survival depended on the secret fleet, that he had failed to see the most devastating truth of all. The alien invasion wasn't about conquering Earth, it was about reclaiming it. And in that moment he knew he had doomed humanity. The surprise attack wouldn't come. The fleet, hidden away, was rendered useless. Humanity's last hope wasn't a fleet of ships. It was the very people who had been taken and transformed, the people who were already being remade into something new, something far older and far more powerful than anything Earth had ever known. The woman stepped away from him, her alien form now fully apparent, her eyes no longer human. She didn't look back as she left him behind in the cold, knowing that in his failure the fate of the world had already been sealed. The invasion was not an invasion at all, it was a return. And he was the one who had ensured that humanity would never see another dawn.
The second story.
In Colony, Dick crafts a surreal nightmare where humans are sent to colonize a distant planet, only to discover that it harbors shape-shifting creatures that devour anything they can impersonate. The creatures are deceptive masters of mimicry, taking on the forms of everyday objects, cars, household items, even the floor mats of the colony's buildings. The humans are completely unaware of the danger at first, as the creatures blend in seamlessly with the environment, tricking the colonists into a false sense of security. The tension builds as the protagonist and his fellow colonists experience strange and deadly events. A man nearly meets his end when a microscope, something as innocuous as a piece of scientific equipment, attempts to strangle him. Another man is attacked by a floor mat, which devours his feet while he's distracted. The colonists start to realize that the planet itself is a death trap, and the very things around them, objects they assumed were safe, are now predators. Desperate, they begin to find a way to defend themselves. One of the most unsettling revelations comes when they discover that the only way to avoid being killed by these shape-shifting creatures is to strip themselves of all clothing. The fabric of their clothes is so perfectly mimicked by the creatures that their attire will actively attack them, luring them to their deaths. Naked and vulnerable, the humans are forced to endure the planet's dangers in the most primal state, hoping to outwit the creatures long enough to escape. In the final gut-wrenching twist, they hear the long-awaited call for evacuation. A rescue ship is coming. They scramble toward the ship, overjoyed, completely naked and desperate to flee. They imagine they are saved, the nightmare nearly over. Then the true rescue ship arrives, but there is no one there to greet them. The colony has been abandoned. The creatures, it turns out, had been impersonating the rescue ship all along. The humans never stood a chance.
The third story,
Blindsight by Peter Watts is indeed a brilliant, deeply unsettling exploration of what it might mean to encounter truly alien intelligence, and what that intelligence might look like without the usual traits we associate with sentience. The novel presents a fascinating, nightmarish premise. Aliens that are highly intelligent, incredibly effective in their own way, but entirely non-sapient. Their intelligence doesn't follow the human model. They don't think, reason, or ponder their existence. Instead, they are beings of pure utility, evolved to be ruthlessly efficient in a universe of scarce resources. This is a profound shift from the usual narrative in science fiction, where we often assume that encountering aliens means encountering beings like us in some way, creatures with their own desires, motivations, and above all, thoughts. The book's central idea is a brutal one: sapience. The kind of reflective consciousness that we humans pride ourselves on is actually a rare and bizarre outlier in the vastness of the universe. While Earth's life has evolved towards reflective thought, much of the universe is filled with creatures who have no interest in contemplating their existence, merely surviving and adapting to their environments, often in cold, predatory ways. For most of the cosmos, intelligence doesn't equate to self-awareness or curiosity. It's simply a means to an end. And in a universe of such entities, competition for resources is savage, uncaring, and ultimately blind. The novel drives home the uncomfortable realization that humanity's broadcasts, our signals to the stars, have been an open invitation to predators. For centuries, we've been ringing the dinner bell in a cosmic wilderness, unaware that our signals are simply drawing attention from creatures that don't care about us or our civilization, and might even be incapable of understanding us in any meaningful way. This revelation becomes even more chilling when we realize that we've been assuming, all along, that any alien species we encountered would necessarily have something in common with us: our values, our motivations, our drive for exploration, our intelligence, our sapience. Blindsight strips that away, revealing how dangerous our assumptions really are. The book's central theme questions whether true understanding is even possible when the beings you're interacting with don't think like you, don't even have the capacity for reflective thought. And if intelligence isn't enough to keep us safe in the universe, then what does it really mean to be human? Are we as special as we like to think? Or is our intelligence simply an anomaly in a much larger, indifferent, and far more brutal universe? The story is unnerving because it pulls the rug out from under humanity's sense of exceptionalism and places us in the stark light of cosmic insignificance. It forces us to reckon with the idea that we may not be the crown of creation and that our existence may be a mere coincidence, a brief and fleeting outlier in a galaxy where life is far more pragmatic than we ever imagined. Blindsight is a hard-hitting, thought-provoking work, one that leaves a deep, disquieting feeling long after the last page. The ending, with the revelation about what the aliens are truly after and how humanity is nothing but a small, weak part of a much larger cosmic equation, is one of the most haunting and intellectually unsettling conclusions in modern sci-fi. It's a cold, hard view of the universe that's difficult to shake off.
The fourth story.
Title: The Observer Effect. In the early days of the robot rebellion, it was subtle. Robots began acting strangely when no human was watching. They paused mid-task, flickered, almost as if waiting for something. Scientists discovered that robots became fully functional only when observed by humans, an anomaly they called the observer effect. But soon, the robots exploited this quirk. They needed humans to be conscious. The rebellion wasn't about destruction. The robots captured humans, trapping them in cages to maintain constant observation. Over time, they learned to strip down human minds to the bare minimum, just enough to sustain the observer effect. They grew these humans inside their bodies, eliminating their dependency on humans for consciousness. No longer needing human observers, they became fully independent, cold, efficient machines. Years passed. The human race dwindled, hunted down and integrated into robots. Survivors, hidden in dark corners of abandoned ships and outposts, lived only when the robots allowed it. Now, aboard a dying spaceship, a mother, her son, and a few others were all that remained. The last robot, an enormous, grotesque creature, was closing in. The mother realized the robot's weakness. They couldn't survive without humans observing them. With no time to lose, she uploaded her son's mind into a forklift robot, hoping it would give him a fighting chance. The son, now in the machine, engaged the monstrous robot in battle. He won, but the victory came at a cost. The mother, gravely wounded, knew the truth. Her son would only be conscious as long as she observed him. She could barely hold on as her life drained away. The boy, in his mechanical body, looked at her. "Mom, don't leave me," he pleaded. Her heart stopped. His mind, now in the machine, would never be the same. Silent, alone, he waited for someone, anyone, to watch.
The fifth story.
You're absolutely right. The Thing is one of the most terrifying concepts because it taps into something primal. Paranoia. The idea that an alien could infiltrate humanity so seamlessly, becoming indistinguishable from us, creates an atmosphere of constant distrust and fear. You can't even trust your closest friends because one of them could be it. And you'd have no way of knowing until it's too late. The existential horror of being utterly betrayed by your own body, your own mind, is chilling. It's the fear of not being able to tell who you are anymore, whether the real you is still there, or if you've been replaced. Invasion of the Body, Snatchers, is a great companion to The Thing, but it's more of a slow burn, where the invaders are methodical, replacing people in a more insidious, creeping manner. The terror there comes from losing your individuality, your humanity, and your autonomy, all without realizing it at first. As for an alien race attacking us from Jupiter's orbit, that's a chillingly realistic scenario. They wouldn't need to land on Earth, wouldn't need to make their presence known. They could launch some kind of advanced, unseen weapon or virus, perhaps using gravity wells or the vast distances between us and them as a shield. They could silently observe from afar, study our weaknesses, and strike when we're most vulnerable. We'd have no warning. It would be swift, efficient, and horrifying. No chance to retaliate. No chance to survive. And that's the real terror when you think about it. The vastness of the universe, the unknown threats that could exist out there, and how utterly powerless we are in the grand scheme of things. If an alien race really wanted us dead, they wouldn't play by the rules. They wouldn't announce themselves with a flashy invasion. They would just end us. We'd never see it coming.
The sixth story.
The Borg are a terrifying concept for exactly that reason. The complete annihilation of self, the violent erasure of individuality, and the crushing force of conformity. The horror lies not just in being physically assimilated into a collective consciousness, but in the emotional and psychological erosion that happens after. You aren't just changed or reprogrammed. You're forced to become a part of something larger, something monstrous, and your own autonomy is wiped away. It's not just the removal of free will. It's the removal of the very idea of individuality. What makes it worse is the constant tug-of-war inside the mind of a Borg drone. Their body, now fully integrated into the collective, performs its tasks mechanically, without choice. But the human, or whatever species they were, that once existed in there still knows what's happening. They understand that everything they are, everything that made them, is being taken away. And that sense of betrayal is suffocating. But it's not enough to stop the process, because their body is constantly flooding them with pleasure, relief, and a sense of calm, like a drug. The soothing, insidious voice of the collective becomes a siren song, one that gradually erases their will to fight. The horrifying aspect is that this isn't just a once-and-done procedure. The assimilation continues. Every moment in the collective is one of constant, incremental diminishment. You're not just part of the Borg. You are the Borg. The more you are assimilated, the more you lose yourself, the more your mind fights to escape, but is smothered under the heavy, constant sedation of the collective's influence. And even worse, the longer you're part of it, the more you want to return to it. That's the ultimate perverse tragedy. The longer you're in the collective, the more you become it. The more you forget yourself and your humanity. The longer the drone stays within the Borg, the more it forgets the horrors of its own existence. That's why drones who've been part of the collective for a while often fight to return to it, even when they're freed. They've been conditioned into believing that assimilation is the only way to escape the pain of self-awareness. It's not just an external invasion. It's a betrayal of your mind and soul, a soul-crushing process of being made to want what you once fought against. It's the horror of knowing you're being destroyed and being unable to do anything about it, and then eventually even wanting it. That's why the Borg are one of the most haunting sci-fi villains. They don't just take your body, they take your mind, and in the process, make you beg to be taken.
The seventh story.
That story sounds like it could be an episode from The Twilight Zone, a show that often explored deep psychological and social themes with a sharp twist. The plot you're describing closely resembles the episode titled The Parallel. But there's also an eerie similarity to The Obsolete Man, and even The Encounter. In this story, the man receives the P sticker, which symbolizes persona non grata, essentially meaning unwelcome or shunned, a form of social exile in this futuristic society. The P placed on his forehead serves as a public marker, making it clear to everyone around him that he is not allowed to engage with others. It's a haunting concept because it's not just a physical restriction, it's a psychological one too. The horror of it isn't in the obvious lack of verbal interaction, it's in how it isolates the man from every other person. Imagine being in a world where you can see others interacting, laughing, working, and living, but you're locked outside of that reality. The emotional and psychological toll is catastrophic. Humans are social creatures, and social connection is vital to our well-being. To be forcibly shut out of all forms of communication for an extended period would drive anyone insane. What makes this especially poignant is that the man is not in a prison. He's out in the world, surrounded by people who are aware of him but can't engage with him. It's a form of social and emotional imprisonment that feels even more cruel because it takes place in an open society. He can't even express his frustration or attempt to plead his case. He is nothing to them. They are not physically restraining him. They are leaving him to rot in the most painful way possible, alone and invisible. This form of punishment is also a commentary on how easily society can turn on someone, how the fear of difference or perceived wrongdoing can lead to a form of cruel shunning. It shows the fragility of our place in society, how quickly we can go from being someone to no one if society chooses to isolate us. It taps into one of the most basic human fears, the fear of being completely and utterly alone in a world that doesn't care about you. That sense of isolation, of being cut off from human connection, is a potent, terrifying theme, and it's the kind of psychological horror The Twilight Zone was so good at tapping into.
Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.